Joining us as he does on a basis of once a month, Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game. He's here this morning to talk a little bit about some upcoming events and some maybe answer some old questions too that people had when they were chiming in on the program. Your last visit was just a few weeks ago, and let me make sure that we can hear you too. We should mention Kelton is a big guy and he can really project that voice, but the microphone that I'm at is across the room. So this is a little better.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, it's nice and clear.
Nice and clear.
We got into a conversation about 6 other topics before we went on the air. So normally I'd have his microphone ready, but we were pretty deep in thought.
We were well. You've got to solve the world's problems before we actually go on air, So
Hey, you wanted to open up today talking about deer trapping, and of course we will take some of your telephone calls a little bit later at 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley as well. Right off the top, you wanted to mention deer trapping.
you bet. I just I love this show, Bill, because we can talk about the things that are going on in the department. We've got a lot of sportsmen that listen, and so just to kind of keep people informed. Right now, we're putting radio transmitters on deer and elk across the state. We just were able to put our around 60, I think it was, in the Frank Church Wilderness area. So we're doing a wolf study program up in there before the injunction was filed. Was able to get all our collars on, so it's awesome. But now we're also putting them on in the South Hills. We've been over in 45. They're trapping Unit 39 over above Boise Front today, and then we'll be in 54 probably on Wednesday, and we've already trapped 55 in some of these areas. And people go, well, why? It's kind of a collar and faller deal. You say it's just to help us predict overall winter survival, see where animals migrate to and the land that they're utilizing, and then see if we have any if something's killing them, what is killing them. Because what we'll do is we'll check these collars nearly on a daily basis. We have technicians that go out and check on some of the populations, not all of them, because we've got roughly 600 deer collars out and about the same on elk. But in some of the areas, we go out and we'll check them every day just to determine what is killing the animals in those areas. So it's actually a pretty good study. And if you see a chopper chasing deer, that's us.
We should point out too that any callers out there, Kelton, they probably would not approve of him talking about the legal issues at the moment. So if you got a call about that, he probably would say no comment.
Yep.
I suspect, though, that the only way to make some people happy would be to have all of you parachute in instead.
Yeah, well,
and then walk out.
I don't know whether they'd want that either. I don't know. It's really interesting because I feel that our studies are really balanced. We're not trying to we want to know what's going on in the ecosystem, what's going on with the population. Mm-hmm. And so it just kind of throws me off once in a while. But everybody's got a difference to opinion, and they can have that. And it's just amazing how many lawsuits we're in all the time, just for different things.
And yet, ultimately, you're environmentalists too.
Well, yeah, we're conservationists is what I like to use. And all sportsmen are conservationists because, I mean, they're helping conserve and pay for wildlife in Idaho. One thing that a lot of people don't know, Bill, is if you do not buy a hunting license or a fishing license in the state of Idaho, and you don't buy ammunition, and you don't buy guns, and you don't buy boating equipment, fishing poles, and stuff like that, you pay zero towards management of Idaho's wildlife. Zero. There's no tax dollars that come to us to pay for managing Idaho's wildlife, other than an excise tax on ammunition and firearms, and so those are typically sportsmen and or shooters, people that like shooting, and then fishing equipment, and so those are the excise taxes. So if you buy a hunting license, we're a dedicated fund agency, and we don't get any money out of the general tax fund, and so it's kind of a different setup, but I think it's a good one because it's basically a user tax.
Yeah,
is what it is, and so, but things have been going just stellar. We've been getting a lot of calls right now on deer and elk because we've had some cold weather and stuff, and so it's been quite interesting. But people haven't seen this much snow in 8 years or 9 years, and they forgot we're not even at normal precip levels right now, and so the elk and deer are doing great.
Now we should point out you were here the last time around. We talked a little bit about some of the problems we had with the elk population and coming down into,
Yeah,
into town and the
and
like.
they're still pounding us up in the Wood River Valley.
And just the other day, in fact, there was a car elk accident out of I think on the highway up toward the mountain home, and
Oh.
so we're seeing still a lot of that.
Well, yeah, the other night we was coming into Friday night's date night. We go grocery shopping,
Yes,
dinner and grocery
that's
shopping,
what marriage is all about.
and it is. And so we're driving in, and all of a sudden, my wife gives me the little kid arm throw, so I don't go through the windshield. She's driving, and she flips her arm over because a whole herd of deer crossed right there on Falls, just over by the Boy Scout Center. People just need to be cautious this time of the year. Keep your eyes when you can run brights because you can see the
Hmm.
borrow pits better. Look for that eye glint. Sun Valley, we're having along 75 and 93, we're getting a lot of strikes, wildlife strikes. On the interstate, we're getting a lot of wildlife strikes, and pretty much any of our back roads. What happens is you get this cold weather, these deer and elk are just looking for more hospitable places to try to make a living. And so they move down in the valleys. Right now, we've got deer and elk. Well, in the past weeks, we've had deer and elk on almost every haystack in the valley. It seems it's close to sagebrush. And so people just need to drive with caution.
In fact, it was my mom. Usually, when you're driving, Dad in the old days taught us everything we needed to know, but it was my mom who taught me to look for that reflection of the eyes as you headed down the highway. And sure enough, she could point it out as you were driving along, and so certain areas you knew where they were crossing after a while.
You bet, you bet, and I loved having my wife in there. She's really cognizant of that, and her eyesight's better, and she always looks for that eye glint, and so, um, you're not really safe anywhere to not run into an animal unless you may be on Blue Lakes, but we've had deer run right down Blue Lakes before too, and so just be cautious when you're out there this time of year. We're starting to get a break in the weather right now. It's gorgeous out there. The last few days, it's supposed to be a nice day today as things warm up. We'll start getting more of these deer migrating back to the south slopes as that opens up and they can get back up into some of that natural habitat. But we've had a lot of issues with people thinking that the deer and the elk are starving to death, and I guess the way I kind of look at it is they're not. It's been a real short stint. The deer have gone into winter really good condition. From our trapping, we've been able to weigh fawns and check body condition, and they're in good shape. Um, I guess what I try to refer it to is, I mean, people see them in their yards nibbling on the trees, and they see them eating haystacks and stuff like this. It's kind of like you and me at Christmas. If we see a plate of cookies and it's sitting on the table, I always grab one. I'm not starving to death, but it's easy. It's candy to me, and I grab one. I'm not starving. That's the same thing with these deer and elk. Yeah, I mean they're chewing on a haystack because it's candy. They can get into it. It's really tempting for them. They're not, and so, but we're monitoring the elk and deer populations really close right now, though.
9:15, and we should point out Kelton Hatch is going to be with us for the entire hour today. And of course, if you have a comment or question for him, 736-0300. He's representing Idaho Fish and Game. And quickly, too, we wanted to mention, caller brought this up the last time you were here, question about spawning bass.
Well, yeah, and he did have a good question. He says, "Well, what length do bass start spawning?" And typically, our regulations say that you can't keep bass until they reach 13 inches in a lot of the ponds. Well, that between 13 and 15 is their prime spawning size. So seems like kind of contradictory that you can start catching them just as they're spawning. Our goal is to get as many fish to that size as possible so that we're not going to catch them all. But once they hit that size, hopefully we'll get one, maybe two spawning seasons out of them before they're captured. The larger the bass, the more eggs they do produce. We're actually in the middle of a study right now. Well, not in the middle. We just put it on our agenda. We put a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan. Well, one of our 5-year plan, it's moved down to our 5-year plan now, is a survey or a research project on bass spawning, and we're looking at whether it's best to have the catch rate, I mean, the slot limit at 13 inches or 15 inches to see which one will be more productive. And so we may see some changes on that in 5 or 6 years, depending on what the research shows. But we are watching that really close. But that was a good question, and bass doesn't. produce a ton of eggs. A 13-inch bass may only produce about 1,000 eggs, but if you can get enough of them out there dropping eggs. Our biggest issue with bass in this area is just habitat. Not every inch of water is good for bass. Some of it's not high enough in nutrients. Other ponds are too cold for them, and so our main factor is just carrying capacity. So, but we are studying that.
We have a caller with us. Of course, it's 24 and 917, and you're on the air with Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game.
Good morning, guys. This is the guy that my wife shot that moose, and she was concerned. It had a calf with it, but gosh, the calf was almost as big as the cow. What is the survival chances for that calf?
Really, really good.
Okay.
And the reason is the last thing we want to do is have a season where we shoot the mothers and then the offspring pass away or die. The thing is when you look at cattle and stuff like that, you wean them. It's just a natural part of that. And, when we have those seasons, the fawns, the calf elk, and the calf moose are by far, granted, there is going to be a few that were really late calvers.
Well, this one was just about the same size as a mother, and it's going to make her feel better to know that. Yeah. And I told her that because I said they wouldn't have you go out and shoot an antlerless.
No, that's next season's hunt, or maybe in 2 or 3 years. Hopefully it gets big enough and it'll have a calf, or if it's a bull, it can pass on those genetics. But really high survival rate. They're nursing once in a blue moon just because of habit. They don't need to nurse at all. And typically that cow will kick them off in the next few weeks anyway. They may hang out.
That's what I understood. Yeah. If they go into rut or something, they'd probably chase the cow. I had one more question, Kelton.
You bet.
We went out south of Burley here to hunt rabbits, and there was just bunches. And somebody asked me about the spotlighting issues, and I said, gosh, I don't know. What is the deal with spotlighting rabbits?
Well, the sad thing is spotlighting rules have. When I was a kid, we spotlighted all the time. I grew up over in eastern Idaho, and it was just a way of life. You went spotlighting because we had 1,000 rabbits standing around a haystack, and it was a way that we could control rabbit populations. Well, we've had too many people that have used that for illegal gain, I guess you'd say, spotlighting, shooting deer and stuff like that. There is a thing called a spotlighting permit that you can apply for, but we very, very, very seldomly give them out, mostly just on private property. I can talk a little bit more after this break.
Yeah, and we've got the government music here too. See?
Yeah. But thanks for your calls.
We've got more with Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game coming up on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, more of your telephone calls, too. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. Kelton Hatch is joining us in the studio from Idaho Fish and Game. And, of course, if you'd like to reach him while he's here this hour, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX or online at newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with Top Story. And Calder mentioned spotlighting in the last segment of the program, and there were a couple of other things you wanted to mention about that.
Yeah, just to clear this up, we've just had so many issues with that they don't issue those spotlights permits anywhere that there's wintering wildlife, and they're really difficult to get. If you happen to get one for private property, you still need to call the local sheriff and the Fish and Game officer, because I guarantee somebody's going to call and report you that you're out driving around with a spotlight. And so that's one of those things that just aren't common anymore. But there is a lot of rabbits out there, a lot of rabbits. So if you're looking for some supper, good little cottontail stew is pretty tasty.
9:25. We have a caller with us, and you're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Go ahead.
Hi, Kelton. Hey, I got a question about this Minidoka Reservoir, Lake Walcott. Are the numbers of fish, the trout, or do you ever study the numbers of trout on that reservoir? And if so, what do you find?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to answer this in real generic terms because I'm not a fish biologist, but we have looked at that, and what we're finding is a lot of those fish are planted in the cold water area and stuff like that, and then they'll move down the stream system and then end up in the lake down there. And we end up getting some really big fish down in that area. I know that the biggest issue we have over there is the carp and trash fish, because when we've gone in there, typically you'll catch, or when we're electrofishing, it'll be 100 to 200 fish, trash fish, that will tip over before we ever tip over a game fish to be able to dip net it out. It's somewhere around 100 and some odd. And so a lot of our biomass, or the area of the lake, is being taken up by trash fish, and that's our biggest challenge on almost all these systems on the Snake River, is to be able to manage the non-target or non-game fish in order to leave enough habitat for our game fish. And so, but numbers seem to be really strong over there on the rainbow trout, and we get a big migration, and it's one of our more productive lakes. I know American Falls catches a lot of big fish, and then a bunch of them will spawn underneath the dam, and we plant them in cold water, and it just seems like we get a lot of those fish moving down through the system.
We're just not doing any good, Kelton, is why I ask. I've talked to a lot of people this weekend, and we're just not doing any good. We've got a few little planters, but we're just, this year has been, I've caught one fish this year, and I go ice fishing quite a bit, and I'll tell you what, one little 12-inch trout, and it's just not been worth a darn.
Well, that's terrible, and that's the first I've heard of that. What I'll do, let me come back next week. Not next week, but next time I'm in here, I'll talk to Doug McGargle, or if you want to call him at the regional office at 324-4359. He's our fisheries manager, and he can probably give you a more in-depth reasoning, because he does stay up on that more than I do. But it's Doug McGargle, and he's the fisheries manager over there. 324-4359.
Want to thank him for the call. He referenced ice fishing. We got a couple of minutes before the break. I know you wanted to mention something about that too.
See, these ice fishing guys are just tougher than I am.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you go out and sit on a stool on an ice cube all day with your feet sitting against the ice, if it's fishing's good, I feel sorry for this guy, because I mean, I have ice fished quite a bit, but it's like I have to have really good fishing rates. Otherwise, I'm too ADD to sit there for 12 hours. But we've had some really good fishing at some of the other lakes. I really don't want to hotspot any of them, but we've had some really good success on a few of them this winter. But as I always say, please, please, please be cautious when you're out on the ice. We're not, we're just not known for great ice conditions around here. So it's something that you need to continually check every time. Even if it was good last week, if you have a few 40-degree days, it gets pretty doggy pretty quick. And the biggest fear on those is hitting a spring, an underwater spring that's coming up warmer out of the ground, and then you get soft spots in the ice. And so always be cautious when you're going out onto the ice. But it can be a fun day if it's a non-wind sunny day. It's just, there's nothing better than being outside this time of year, just to get some UV, and just enjoy the outdoors.
I was going to say, it's the Walter Matthau going out there with his TV set. And
Well, I always thought it was funny when you see these little ice huts out there. You're going out to sit on an ice cube in a house. I mean, if I'm sitting in a house, I might as well sit by the fireplace, But no, the winds and stuff like that, you can keep those a little warmer. But get out and have some fun. It is a good time to get out and do some ice fishing.
We've got more with Kelton Hatch coming up. It's 9:30:25. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. If you have a question, there we go, about fish and game, we'll take that up in the next half hour. Remember, the number 736-0300. Our guest is Kelton Hatch. He's joining us from Idaho Fish and Game. Of course, he's also taking some of your telephone calls this morning, too, as well. That number is 736-0300. News Radio 1310 KLIX, and of course online anywhere all over the world, newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley. We didn't get into some depth on some of the other issues you wanted to bring up today. We might want to mention wintering wildlife and hunter education coming up too.
One thing that we're having a lot of issue right now with is up in the Sun Valley area, and we've had it over in Idaho Falls and other parts of the state, is a plant called Japanese yew, and it's very toxic, and it can it's can can kill your pets, your dogs too. I mean, any animal that eats it, and so I guess it's just kind of a warning if you've got a kind of uh, a flat needled uh, evergreen in your yard and you live near wildlife, it may be something, or if you're planning on doing some landscaping. I guess the thing is, if you're planning on doing some landscaping, you're building a house, just kind of be cognizant that there is some plants that are not native to this area that are very toxic to our area wildlife and could be to your family and your family pets. Just kind of do a little bit of research on wildlife friendly plants. We've had about 10, 14, 15 animals die on it this year. We had a moose over in Idaho Falls a few years ago. We've had animals up in the Sun Valley. Typically, it's where we get a little bit of snow and the animals come into the valley. But and I guess it's just something that just to be cautious of. Another thing is for your Tweety birds, bird feeders. Been really cold. People have been putting a lot of seed out and stuff like that. You need to be watchful this time of year as it starts warming up during the day. If you've got much moisture or the seed has got very wet, you can get molds and spores in those seeds underneath that can poison birds. And every year, about come February, March, we have some birds die in somebody's yard because they get some mold in their bird feeders and stuff like that. So be cognizant of that. When it gets low, clean them out really good. Put in fresh seeds. Don't just keep dumping seed on top of seed because sometimes you get a wet layer and they'll stick to the bottom of your feeder and stuff like that. So be kind of cognizant of that also. And other than that, as we kind of touched on it, but just be cautious when you're driving around because you could run into deer or elk almost anywhere in the Magic Valley, especially along Rock Creek, along the Snake River Canyon, any of these wildlife corridors. You're going to have animals using those to move from one area to another, and then coming out on the near the roadways and stuff like that to feed at night or move across the roadway. We get a lot of strikes even down by Rock Creek. Over by the old Grandview Theater and stuff like that because it goes right through town and almost any of the country roads you can find deer or elk. Well, not necessarily elk, but a lot of deer, pronghorn, and stuff like that out in the valley. So be cautious.
We have a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air with Kelton Hatch on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, we have Access Yes for kids, youth hunt, and there was two boys showed up out of Colorado with their parents, and they had a great time out here. Was able to get a few birds, and I was really surprised that Utah, that they weren't able to get any hunting at Utah, but came to southern Idaho and had a great time.
Yeah, yeah. That Access Yes program, we got some great landowners and great people that are involved in that program. And just to kind of let people be familiarized with it, what they do is people can either bid their property in, call Fish and Game, and say, hey, if you give us this amount of money, we'll open our private lands up to people to be able to hunt on. Other people just donate it and put it in the Access Yes program. And so we've got a lot. But what this is we've got some tags, super tags, which are basically a government tag. Like, Bill, if you used to put in for it and you drew a deer tag, you'd be able to hunt in any of the units in the state for that deer until you killed one, until the seasons were closed. So you can jump from unit to unit to unit. It's like a $6.50 application fee to get that tag. But all that money goes to this Access Yes program, and it provides access for sportsmen to be able to get onto private property or get across private property to get into federal lands. We also purchase access on the Snake River with this Access Yes program, so that people can get on for boating, for fishing, for waterfowl hunting. But if you see these Access Yes boxes, please fill it out so that we know how many people are using that property. Because if you do not fill that out that you are in there, it may not be a priority the next year. Because we get a ton of land people offer to put in there. We just don't have the funding to be able to pay for it all. And so we go through all the ground, and those grounds that are getting used the most are the ones that we refund. And so, but we appreciate his call, and we're thankful for landowners that allow that.
I was going to say maybe they're not doing this much in Utah. They're such peace-loving people. Maybe they've given up hunting.
No, there's quite a bit of hunting. But we do get a ton of folks from Utah that come here just because, Salt Lake's starting to grow up and get big, and their draw system's completely different. And I mean, where I get to hunt elk every year if I want, down there but you can't hunt for the quality of animals. You have to draw the controlled hunts, and it's harder to draw. And so sometimes you don't get to hunt as much.
We're going to talk a little bit more about hunting coming up in just a few minutes. Kelton Hatch is here from Idaho Fish and Game, joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show's top story with Bill Colley. It's 24, on our way to a high today, perhaps in the mid-30s. Joining us in studio, Kelton Hatch. He is with Idaho Fish and Game, and he takes some time out once a month to answer some of your telephone calls as well. I want to point out that number is 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. 24, and we're coming up on 9:44. Since we were talking a little bit about hunting a few minutes ago, hunter education, something that near and dear you always like to talk about.
Yeah, I love hunter education. It's a great program. We're going full speed right now with hunter ed classes. We're starting to kick up. It's amazing to me the demand that we're having for hunter's ed right now. We're doing field days at least once a month this time of year, typically, and then we'll get going twice a month on field days just for the online classes. So there's multiple ways people can get their hunter's education. It's either through an instructor-led class or on the computer, or we do have a workbook option, but we try to keep people on these other two. That's kind of just a last scenario if we can't get them in these other classes. But I guess my plea today, Bill, is I'm looking for hunter ed instructors. Our hunter ed instructors are all volunteer. They come in and they usually do a 12 to 14 hour class. We have a workbook, a teacher's guide for them to go through and stuff like that. But it's very critical that we get people that are good ethical hunters that want to pass on the tradition. And, so if anybody out there that's interested in teaching hunter's ed, you can call me at the regional office or Tanneray Alberti, and I'll just pass you on to Tanneray Alberti. She's the hunter ed coordinator. I work with the program myself, but our number over there is 324-4359, and we're looking for hunter ed instructors in all parts of the region, from Sun Valley to Mountain Home to Burley to, down into Oakley or Rogerson or any of those areas. Regardless of where you live, if you're interested in doing that, give us a holler, and we'd love to put you through the interview to talk to you about it. So people know, we do the interview. We have run a background check on all our instructors, and then they go through a training course, a one-day training course that we go through, and then they team teach with a veteran instructor or with Tanneray or someone that is with the program. We'll do that until you feel comfortable to run your own class, and then we have them work together as a team. We usually have 2 instructors in there. So if there's an interest there, you want to pass on some of your traditions to the next generation and teach them to be safe, give us a holler.
We have another caller with us, and you're on the air with Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. With Kelton Hatch from Idaho. Go ahead. On News Radio. All right, turn the radio down because I'm hearing a little feedback. All right, well, we'll try our next caller then. You're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning. This is Pat.
Sure, Pat.
I was a hunter educator for 11 years, and it was a great experience. And if anybody out there would like to have a great experience of having these kids come up to you 10, 15, 20 years later and telling you about these awesome hunting trips they've done, it's a great experience to pass that on and see it grow.
Well, thank you very much.
I want to thank him for the telephone call. And one thing we should point out, you're not just talking firearm safety. When you're talking hunting education, you got to be talking about how you take care of yourself in weather, conditions, other wildlife you might encounter. All of those things have to be taken into consideration.
Oh, it is. It's huge. I guess the biggest thing I look at is ethics, is what it ends up really panning out to be. I mean, we do a survival portion, we do the, firearm safety, muzzle control, um, and all of that type of stuff. But the students' ethics, what type of hunter are they going to be? Are they going to live by the rules? Are they going to live by the rules of fair chase? Are they going to treat the public in a good manner? Are they going to treat landowners in a good manner? Because these are all critical aspects of sportsmanship and being an ethical hunter. And so, no, we're looking for the best of the best for these instructors, because this is, it's cool. You can see these kids. They learn a lot. A lot of times their parents sit in, and it's just a good way to get these kids off on going. Well, not just kids. We're getting a ton of adults. A lot of women are starting to pick up the hunting bug, and one of our fastest growing demographics is women right now. And so we've taught a few women only classes. So we're always looking for female instructors too. We love to get, this isn't a male dominated deal. We've got a lot of great female instructors in this also, and we like to get a real good diversity of instructors in there with different ilks of, that they like to hunt, from bird hunters to big game hunters to, archery hunters. We do have a bow hunter education class. And so whatever you if you feel like doing this, give us a holler.
Want to point out to you, you can give Kelton Hatch a holler here. We've got about 10 minutes left in this segment of the program. Telephone number 736-0300. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. 27 right now at 9:50. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well. And you wanted to mention hunting seasons that are winding up.
It's getting that time of year. It's the saddest time of year. I mean, my wife kind of gets excited this time of year because things are starting to slow down a little bit. But
she thinks you're in the witness protection program for a few months.
Yeah, so I've been gone for 5 months, but I'm back now for the next 7, and then I'll be gone again. But we got a lot of waterfowl. Some of our waterfowl over in eastern Idaho actually winds up on the 15th of January for a waterfowl. Our waterfowl in our area will go to January 29th. Our upland game bird seasons are getting close because on January 31st, most of those will start shutting down. And so get out there and enjoy this time of year. Just be cautious. Just start looking at your regs. You kind of get into this mode when you've been hunting waterfowl or birds or whatever you've been hunting for a long time, but you kind of forget some of those things, So, but you can start looking at those. Rabbit season will go a little bit later. Those are always fun into February. Got some trapping going on right now, and some lion hunting that's going on. And it's actually time to start applying for next year's controlled hunts, believe it or not. Later this month we'll have applications going out for spring turkey and bear. We only have a couple of controlled hunt areas for bear. Most of the state opens on April 15th, and it's a general over-the-counter tag for your bear. But we do have a few controlled hunts for those, and so that application time's coming right up.
We have a caller with us, and of course, what I mentioned, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game is joining us in the studio and taking some of your telephone calls. And you're up next. You're on the air.
What's Fish and Game's annual budget for control of wolves?
Control of wolves. I can't even remember that. I'm sorry, but I will come back with that. We do have a budget that's been set forth by the governor's office. They gave us money, and then we have some in there also, but I cannot remember that off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but next month I'll try to have that number for you.
Well, hey, here's a quick question to add to that. How far south have they now wandered?
Well, I mean, we've had reports of them in Utah. They're in Oregon and Washington. The thing is I always like to tell a story. We had a study going on in Unit 55 over by Burley, where we was radio tracking mountain lions, and we collared mountain lions over there by Malta, and one was killed in Reno, and another one was killed up at over by Red Lodge, Montana. And these are within weeks of them being trapped and radio collared. Young males, young females looking for a partner, get out and eat up some country. Wolves are the same way. We'll have wolves that will, they've killed them in Preston, they've killed them in Utah. I'm sure that we've had them passing through the South Hills. We don't know of any of established packs down there. People argue that fact, but we're not losing cattle, we're not losing sheep, and we haven't had any verification that there's an established pack down there. I'm not doubting, though, that we've had them pass through that area. They're just probably not finding what they're looking for a good place to make a living. And so, they're big, long-legged critters that eat up the country, and so they can wander about anywhere.
9:54, and we have another caller with us. You're up next, and you're on the air on KLIX. All right, caller, you're listening in delay, so you might want to take a listen to the telephone. You're on the air.
Good morning. I realize you passed this subject, but
I'll tell you what, turn down the radio, and then you won't have the feedback.
About this Japanese plant, is it possible for it? You won't have the feedback. Is it possible for it to appear in your pasture and be harmful to your horses without you knowing it?
Well, it would have to be planted out there by somebody. It's not. It's a non-native plant, and you shouldn't have any issue. There's other plants if you're in moist areas that could pop up out there, but this Japanese yew, I wouldn't be afraid of it. You're gonna have to buy it at a nursery and go dig a hole and put it in the ground to get it out there.
Well, thank you for the call. There's no threat that this is going to blow in
seeds
from somewhere.
It's not going to seed around town. This is just a plant that people plant, and if you're not living right next door to somebody with it, you're not going to get it. Because it's not. I don't know that it's even rhizomatous where it grows from the roots in other places. I think it's just a plant that has to be put in the ground.
From the landscapers.
Uh-huh.
We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air at 9:55. Good morning.
Good morning. I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Hatch for how helpful the fishing game is. They've just been very good to work with. And then I have a question about controlled hunt harvest information from last year. Do you have any idea when that's going to come out?
We typically we would be really pounding the numbers right now, trying to get those ready because we'd be having big game season setting meetings. Well, they changed things, so we've got 2-year regulations, and so we're not pushing it as hard right now. We will have it out before the controlled hunts so that you'll be able to go online and see what harvest success were in each of the hunting units. I know that they're starting to compile it. Just because the reports are coming in right now. And I appreciate you asking that. Please get your hunter report cards in. That's a critical measure for us to be able to monitor success on our different hunts so that when we go to set seasons in the coming year, that we'll know how many animals were removed from that area, and we can combine that with our composition counts as well as our population counts so that we know what's going on with the population so we know where to set our permit level. But we should have that. I'm guessing we'll have it out within the next 2 months. But thanks.
I want to thank the caller for chiming in. Got about 2 minutes to go. You referenced mountain lions. And, of course, a photograph the other day hit the websites and the newspapers.
The freak show.
Yeah, the case. It happens probably once in a blue moon, right? You come across this.
And this is the first one I've ever seen. And then the photo is it had another upper jaw growing out of the back of its skull. They don't know whether it had absorbed, if it was a twin situation, and it absorbed the other fetus, or if there's just some other mess up in the genetic code somehow. But this cat had attacked a dog over in the Weston area. It ran up the canyon. Hound hunters went after it. They harvested the animal legally, but it had full canines, had some little short whiskers, and had a couple of the premolars and stuff like that coming out of the back of its skull. It was kind of weird looking, and so but it's just one of those genetic anomalies, is a birth defect in this animal. And we don't anticipate seeing a whole bunch of them running around out
But it was
there.
a full-grown animal. A lot of times
It
they won't
was.
make it to that age.
Yeah, a lot of times they won't, but evidently this hadn't affected its brain or its spinal column or any of that type of stuff, so it is able to grow to maturity and survive. But it was still a younger animal, because I think they figured it was a yearling, and that's why it got caught. Got a little hungry, couldn't chase down a deer. The dog was a lot easier. Didn't kill the dog, but it was removed from the population.
Want to point out Kelton Hatch joining us from Idaho Fish and Game. We'll see you again in about a month.
You bet. Hey, thanks a bunch. Love the calls. Call us with your questions, and we'll try to get back with you on the amount of money for wolves and what's going on with the fish at Walcott.
And we'll know a lot more about that state budget, too, in the next few weeks.
We will.
Coming up, 10 o'clock news, and God willing, if the creek don't rise, I get to do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh following Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity at 1 o'clock today, and Glenn Beck at 4 this afternoon.